Good afternoon. I want to welcome everyone to our afternoon session. My name is Bonnie Bowen, and I'm a faculty member in Ecology, Evolution, and Organismal Biology, and I'm a co-PI on the SP at ISU program. And for most of you, I assume were there this morning to hear about basic principles of evaluation. This afternoon, this session is going to focus on a topic that we talked about several times this morning, but the specifics of evaluating undergraduate research experiences. Many of us have involve undergraduates in our research. It's a key component of broader impacts here on the Iowa State campus and really nationwide. And so we've brought an expert on evaluation of undergraduate research from our nearby sister college, Grinnell College. David Lopatto is a professor of psychology, and he has developed an instrument that's been used for the last several years to evaluate undergraduate research, students that are involved in NSF and HHMI, Howard Hughes Medical Institute programs for research. So he's going to tell us about the instrument he's developed, some of the outcomes, and how you can, keep thinking about ways we might even adapt this here. And then following his presentation, we'll have a panel discussion with some faculty who are involved in research for undergraduates, and they'll talk about their evaluation. And develop your questions as we go along so that we can try to get to the bottom of some of the issues that we raised this morning. So, welcome.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that introduction. There is an alternative introduction for Grinnell College professors now, you may know, starting about a week ago when a young man named Jack Taylor played a basketball game at Grinnell, and so all we need to say is Professor Lopatto is from that college where that guy scored 138 points in one game. But I'm here, my primary purpose is really just to describe a survey we've developed for having students self-evaluate their undergraduate research experiences, primarily in the sciences, and to show you what's in it and what kind of results that can be gleaned from it. Give you some sense of whether or not you think it would be useful in your own endeavors or other kinds of questions you may have. And even just being here for a short time, Jim Swartz, my colleague, and I, we tried to strategically miss the morning meetings but get here for lunch, and we almost did that. We've noticed that when we say research experiences for undergraduates, there's sort of, in the lowercase, that's all research experiences for undergraduates, regardless of whether you're talking in the NSF grants or broader impacts or what have you. But there's also the research experiences for undergraduates in CAPS, which is the NSF program. And so I'm going to show you a couple of slides how students who were in the REU program in CAPS evaluated their experience as well. So let's look at that. I have to give some credit. Professor Sarah Elgin of Washington University is a distinguished HHMI professor, and she was at an HHMI meeting several years ago, and she wanted to know, do we really know how the students are doing when we fund undergraduate research experiences? And it happened that I had already started some research in that area, so we got together and we devised a survey, which originally was meant for students who were from colleges and universities funded by the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, many programs of which provide funding for undergraduate research in the sciences, mostly biology and chemistry, mostly in the summer. The most authentic dose is to have students who are not otherwise engaged come for a summer and stay for about 8 to 10 weeks, immerse them in some what we think of as authentic research, real science, and then have them evaluate their experiences at the end. But we found that once we devised this survey, which was originally known as the Summer Undergraduate Research Experiences, but then turned out to be useful all year round, so we turned it into the Survey of Undergraduate Research Experiences. We didn't have to change the acronym one bit. There was tremendous interest in finding an instrument like this from people who were not affiliated with the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. So I make this point because I want you to understand that the SHORE survey is not simply an in-house survey for Howard Hughes. It is open to any institution where students are doing undergraduate research. What's on the SHORE survey? Well, the original SHORE survey was a post-experience survey, usually completed at the end of a summer or the end of a term. It asked the students, of course, demographic questions because many programs are interested in demonstrating that they are including students from underrepresented groups. It asked about career plans because one of the long-term outcomes in the sciences is often to say that our students will go on in careers in science. And it includes peer mentoring, which was a feature we added after a few years when it became evident that at many institutions, undergraduates were being employed to mentor other undergraduates. So that's undergraduate peer mentoring. Some learning gain items that we had gleaned from early research, which I use in many of our surveys, an evaluation of the mentor and some other features of the program. And then just this summer, because some of our partners, that's what we call you, our partners, have asked us if we could gather some information from students, not at the end of their experience, but at the very beginning. If we could somehow situate what those students are thinking at the beginning of the summer, could we have another survey? And so we invented one. I'll show you a couple of slides from it. And we called it the Preflection. Because although that's a terrible word salad name, we find that when students start to use surveys, if anything isn't perfectly clear, they go to the wrong survey. So Preflection sort of steered the Preflection, I get it, and then they would go to the survey. The numbers simply of people who take this survey every year have grown. This summer just concluded. In 1 year we had 3,400 students complete the survey, and that included, I looked recently, 167 students who, by checking off their funding source, self-identified as actually having funding from an NSF REU program in the sciences. Now I'm going to show you a slide that I like to show audiences, and if I was here a few weeks ago, and if you were in that audience, you might want to look away, okay? But this is a slide showing the kinds of learning gains and evaluation of learning gains. Students take the survey online. They have scales, 1 to 5 scales. How much did you gain in this particular area? 1 is the least, 5 is the most. That's pretty. And what I tell people about this slide is if you stare at it for about 60 seconds and then transfer your gaze to a blank wall, you'll see green. Okay? It's a wonderful opponent process demonstration. But what we're seeing, and I hope you can read some of it, is that, and I'll repeat some of these, there are a number of self-evaluated items about the students' learning of science in general, how scientists think, how they solve real problems. There are some skills questions, writing, oral presentations, posters, and there are some personal items, because the theme of research that I've done for the last decade is that the personal development is as important as the professional development. And so tolerance for obstacles, which almost everyone runs into, readiness for the next level, are some of the things we ask people to evaluate. We also ask about program components. Almost everyone has a program, and one of the kinds of things that they share is they perhaps have students write an application. We should get back to that in just a moment. Sometimes during the summer there will be seminars so that scientists can come and talk about what they do and perhaps give students a sense of what a career is like, that there are safety seminars or ethics seminars and so on. And so the question is, do any of these make any difference? And the answer is yes, they do. We know, for example, that if you don't do it now, one of the highest impact changes you can make is to have an explicit training in ethical conduct of research. Now, when we were beginning to ask that question a few years ago, the actual programs were very spotty. Now, you know that NSF and others have sort of tightened up their requirements for integrity in research, and so maybe that will go away. But it turned out that if you had an explicit ethics seminar, that came out in the data as learning, that students benefited from making a final presentation of some kind. Either you have an on-campus poster session or paper session, or maybe you send them to conferences, and this was correlated with self-reports of improvement in science writing and oral presentation. We asked them if they felt like they were part of a learning community, and this was correlated with the kinds of social activities that were sometimes scheduled for them. and the career path ratings correlated with the visiting scientists. So the program features that you might plan actually seem to have an effect on the students in the sense of their evaluations. I might say as we leave that housing and food are not associated with general satisfaction, but they are associated with dissatisfaction. So we have, at the end of the survey, we do have a place for comments, and nobody ever says nice things about food. So I would have had a great time, but the food was terrible. Now, let's take these 21 different items, and let's average them just to get a gross sense of how students felt that they were learning. And let's compare it to a question about their research supervisor, which we explicitly define as a mentor and a teacher. And here, year after year, we find one of the clearest findings of these reports, and that is that mentoring matters. It may, in fact, matter more than anything else. Students seem to be ignorant of the beautiful instrumentation you have. They take it for granted they would only get the best laboratories, the best field work. Don't expect them to thank you, but if you are not a good mentor, they will let you know. And if you are a good mentor, they will praise you effusively. They will say, this is the person that turned me on to this particular science. And what I like about this, this bar graph, with those standard error bars being 2 standard errors, is that every bar, every mean represented by the bar, is significantly different from the one next to it. So it's a clean data set that shows that the more they appreciate your mentoring, the higher they rate their experience. Now, of course, one of the issues that people talk about, one of the soft skills, if you will, in doing undergraduate research is that we don't think people are lone wolves anymore. We think they have to work with teams. And so we have a question about that. Do you work alone or in teams? And then evaluate that. It's very difficult to configure what teams they work with. Some people work all together all the time. Some people work at separate lab stations, but then they get together and they talk to each other. So the one sure thing we know is that about 25% of our undergraduates work alone. And then everybody else is working with somebody, and that could be a combination of grad students, postdocs, and professors. We also know that as they work with each other, some are designated as peer mentors. And so we have 3 subgroups we could explore the data for. We have students who have an undergraduate research experience, but they don't have any other peer mentors. We have students who are peer mentors, and we have students who may have worked with a peer mentor, and we wonder if they benefited from being with a peer mentor. If we look at the average learning gains from our 21 items, is there any pattern that comes when we compare these 3 groups? And it's not as impressive as the other slides, but the answer is yes. We have here in this slide an affirmation of the old saying that the best way to learn is to teach. Peer mentors rate their own learning experience higher than other students. People who work with peer mentors rate their experience slightly higher than students who do not interact with peer mentors. We know what peer mentors do, although they don't claim to be heavily trained. We know that they teach and train other students, they're role models, and so we ask them questions. There's a branching section of the SURE survey. If you answer a multiple choice question, say, yes, I'm a peer mentor, you see a series of questions that the other students don't see. And so we ask you about your own experience. This is a 1 to 5 scale. I realize the typing is a little low, a little small, but you'll notice that they are pretty sure they did well as a peer mentor, 4 out of 5. They say that it increases their own motivation to do research, that it has deepened their understanding of research. These are the peer mentors speaking. We load up a few questions that would permit them, if they wanted to complain, but they do not. They disagree that they were on their own too often. They disagree that they were not prepared, and they disagree that they were given too much responsibility. Now, other students are not peer mentors, but they work with peer mentors. So how do they evaluate their experience? We give them some special question. They do agree that peer mentors had a significant positive impact on their experience. They do agree that their peer mentor helped them appreciate the significance of their research and understood their concerns, and they do not agree that the use of peer mentors enabled the faculty or graduate students to ignore me. That's a question. And they do not say that they would have learned more if there had been no peer mentor. So they appreciate the peer mentor experience, and they don't see it as babysitting or being diverted from the primary researchers. In my interaction with scientists, particularly scientists at universities and colleges, I get the impression that if a student starts out their college career saying that they are pre-med, and then at some point, based on their experience, change their minds and decide instead to get a PhD, that the science angels in heaven all applaud. All right, so one statistic that I've learned to start tracking is what happens before and after the experience. Now, we asked the students to recollect, when you were going into this, what did you think your career plan was? And one of the options is a PhD, but another one is medical school. And so we find out that generally, although nearly a third of students going into the summer, this is a third of those thousands of students, think of themselves as having a plan for medical school, the proportion drops from about 33% to 28%, and a similar drop in the NSF REU students. And on the other hand, the proportion who initially said they'd go on for a PhD goes up here from 38 to 45. And I've looked at those data, and those are very often the same people. So we actually see a migration from the pre-med plan to the PhD plan. That's a broader impact depending on your point of view. We find that some students have a terrible experience. Some students don't have a terrible experience, but what they learn is that they don't want to do this anymore. Okay? And fortunately, even though you might get data from 3,000 students, this attrition rate is very low in summer research. This is about 2%. But we can still isolate those folks and look at their own evaluations and compare them to other folks' evaluations, particularly those that got enthusiastic. And this produces a graph like this. So the red squares are the self-evaluation of 21 items by students who say they want to go on in the science. And by the way, this covers all the sciences. And the triangles are the students who said, no, I'm not going to go on. I thought I was, but for some reason I am not. And you can see a gap opens up in their evaluation of their experiences. So the survey does capture the sort of discriminate validity of satisfied students versus dissatisfied students. What do they say in their text statements? Well, some of them that are leaving say, well, I just find I can't work in a laboratory anymore. I'm going to go work with real people. I need Windows or something like that. A few of them say, I can't understand how anybody would ever go on after I had the mean mentor that I had. She made me make up my work days, and if I broke a beaker, I had to pay for it. And she was just generally mean to me, and I'm never coming back to science ever again. Mentoring matters. Well, sometimes people say, if you've got data from thousands of students over the years, is there anything general you can tell us about best practices in running an undergraduate research program? And here's some of them. Program features like applications and final presentations do make a difference. Mentoring certainly makes a difference, and if you're uncertain about how quality the mentoring is, there are mentor training programs. Younger students seem to report gains as large as those for older students. We do notice that the majority of the students who are doing undergraduate research in the United States still seem to be people who are old enough to already be majors. So they're juniors and they're seniors, and that means that while we're keeping them from leaving, we are not attracting new people to the STEM pipeline with that program. That peer mentoring promises to be a very useful activity, and that undergraduate research does remain a pathway for science careers for talent and diverse students. We have, of course, demographic questions, and the evaluation of the learning program is very similar across ethnic and racial groups and very similar for men and for women. Now, this slide, which seems to be a little bit faded, but we'll do the best we can. I went back, given the topic of your discussion today, and looked at the students who actually said that they were part of an NSF REU program. And we found that majority were from research universities. That made sense. The majority were female, as was the general cohort. The majority were white, as is the general cohort. There were no noticeable differences between the kind of benefits they said they got from doing undergrad research and the other groups, HMI students or NIH students. They did not differ on the role of the supervisor, and they did not differ in their overall satisfaction. So there's no way in the outcomes to say that the NSF REU programs are better or inferior to other programs. They're about the same. And here to repeat that migration that makes scientists so happy, The REU respondents, 52 of them, 52% were going to go for a PhD and 21% for an MD. That would be consistent with REU attraction. And after their research, the 52% rose to 63%, and the MD went from 21% down to 15%. And so all the angels in heaven laughed. Now, there are various understandings of what broader impact means, and that is your topic today, so I thought I would just isolate this graph as well. Is there anything in the SHORE survey that helps us understand the broader impact of science undergraduate education? And there are a number of items that would help us self-evaluate. So here are some of those 21 items again, and you can see everything from confidence to teach science to understanding the research process in your field is evaluated positively. I would call your attention, however, that the item called confidence to teach science is traditionally one of the lowest rated items across the board for our 3,000 undergraduates, and that many students are not interested in teaching science and don't associate their undergraduate research experience with being prepared as a teacher. Well, a new feature of the SHORE survey is something called the pre-selection, and was offered to students for the first time this summer. About 800 students took us up on it. It had some of the similar items that would later show up in the SHORE, but I thought I would show you two bits of data, and these are very colorful. As they begin, it occurred to us to ask students to tell us about what might be called their self-efficacy, their self-confidence. Items like this turn up in freshman surveys generally, if you've ever looked at them. And so the question is, for example, compared to the average student, how do you rate your own skills? And they're given 5 items, and you can see they're not exactly intervals. Are you in the bottom 10%? That seems pretty humble. Are you above that but below average? Are you average? Are you above average? And are you in the top 10%? And what we find here, we have math and writing and public speaking, social skills. That was the one I thought would be very different, but not too much. And computer skills. And here we have 800 students telling us that they are above average. Okay? So there is sort of a Lake Wobegon effect here. But what it might really mean is that our programs are selective. Okay? So once again, the sort of catch-22 of these wonderful undergraduate research programs is that we do choose people based on talent and potential. We haven't yet solved the problem of going out, finding students who might not be interested in science and somehow including them in a way that they would actually join. We do have a way of keeping them from leaving. And you can see here that with writing and public speaking, there's a fairly high self-regard. Math skill tends to be the highest self-regard of all, but others are all highly rated as well. And then there's a new section that's not present yet in the SHORE, and that is we try to probe for other motives that students have when they're thinking about their careers in science. And so the script is a little small, but I want to call your attention. Very important is red, and not important is gray. And on the left, the one with the highest red, the highest level of very importance, is something called continue your education. And that makes sense. So many of these people are planning graduate education, particularly in science. From left, the next one is to get work or financial independence, always very important. You can see the red. Not so important is performing public service or working for the social good. That's a little more limited. Being with a partner and starting your own family doesn't appeal to these young people quite yet. Being free to travel, it's okay, but not necessarily a high priority. Managing your health, which I imagine they interpret as wellness, is somewhat of a priority, but then we get into the things that aren't terribly important, and they are pursuing spiritual values, living near your parents, I'll return to that in a second, teaching elementary or high school students got the highest frequency, the highest proportion, these are actually percentages, of not important. Okay, and we talk about the relationship between teaching science and doing science. They don't. Becoming a well-known scientist was surprisingly unimportant. You can want to be scientists, but not necessarily well-known. Helping people with their physical or mental health problems was equivocal, and then in the end it says return to your home community, and that's not important. So you say, why would you even ask that? Living near your parents, returning to your home community. Well, it is said in conversation that some members of underrepresented groups have a very strong value of returning home. It has been said about Native American students. It has been said about Hawaiian students. So as we try to struggle with asking people to go on in their careers, we have to understand what might be anchoring them back to their homes. I've had professors from Hawaiian universities tell me that they have talented Native Hawaiian students who just don't want to go to the mainland to go to a PhD program, so they go home. And so while we have not enough numbers to demonstrate that fact yet here, because those underrepresented groups are so small in frequency, the preflection is sitting there waiting for the accumulation of data that would help us evaluate those, at least what we think of as our general wisdom. Now, so the SHORE survey is available, and in contrast to what some of our colleagues were saying this morning, it is friendly and it is free. Okay? It is funded by the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. Their interest is in the grand data set. You may know I occasionally publish articles based on this grand data set. So all you have to do is ask. Someone in your program has to be the partner who perhaps sends me an email, says, how do I get started? We give you the information. You give the URL to your students. The default for using the SHORE is anonymous. However, if it's okay with your IRB, we can have them put their name or a code in. This would help us match, for example, a preflection to a SHORE outcome, but the SHORE outcome does not need a preflection. We accept the data. We wait until the data set is assembled, and then we create a descriptive report. And it has the advantage that we can benchmark your findings against the whole cohort. So if you've got a little program, you've got 8 undergraduate researchers, and you're wondering, how can I ever do a statistical analysis? Well, we'll give you a graphical analysis. You can see how your students stack up against the rest of the group. And there's a question, Craig.
So I did this last year, thank you, and I have in front of me my graph of how the experience compared. But it was always difficult because it was compared to the whole cohort, right? And so what would have been really useful is my program was targeting community college students. So it would have been amazing to compare not against the national cohort, but against some subset. Can I do that? Is that possible?
Yes. Now we're getting away from free. But there are 2 routes, okay? One is it's not free because now you're asking for something different, or you have to be our friend. And Craig, you are our friend. And some of the questions, like community college students, I think we only have a cohort of about 100 right now. So we're a little bit wary of having possible subgroups that might be so small that we're not really sure whether we trust the statistics. It's like asking, if you had Native American students, could you just compare them to other Native American students? And we have fewer than 50. So in that sense, I guess what we could do is try to accumulate them over multiple years, because the data do not change much. And so maybe we could do it that way. But other instances, other folks have said, well, this is a physics program, and you've given me that whole cohort. Could you break out just the physicists? And we have done that. And we've done it. We're suckers for people who say, and I'm going to publish this. Would you like to be one of the authors? Okay. We've done that. We've co-authored some articles with people across the country. And so, yes, you're right. In principle, we can cut the data a little finer, but we don't advertise that, because then we would be cutting the data for many, many people. But we are susceptible to suggestion and flattery.
Sort of the reverse question, have you also cut data, say, at the institutional level? Like if or at the college level, or across?
What we have done, and we have a chapter in a book whose name I've already forgotten. It came out of a conference at Texas Tech about undergraduate science education. I looked at universities. This is the old Carnegie, not the new Carnegie. The old Carnegie distinctions: R1 universities, small college, liberal arts colleges, and what we call a master's institution, the public institution. So we have 3 categories there, and then we have community colleges, and we have other. We have like national labs sometimes have all their students do it. And in that particular instance, what I did was I took the 21 learning gains, which you saw occasionally on these slides, And I wrote back to the partners, the faculty and administrator partners, and I said, would you do me a favor, go through the 21 and tell me whether you think at your institution these learning topics are taught explicitly, and then I had like parentheses with a program or a seminar, or implicitly, parentheses, you trust your mentors to do this. Okay? And so I had that distinction, I had the three institutions. If you look at the data by kind of institution, you get no differences. Okay, so the research student, the university students, on average, are reporting the same gains as the college students, as the master's institution students. If you cross it, use your imagination here, 3 by 2, the three type of institutions, and then these two categories called explicitly versus implicitly, there was a wonderful set of interactions where the university students scored their gains higher if it was explicitly taught to them, and the college students, the liberal arts students, scored their gains higher if it was implicitly taught to them. And this was around 2004, 2005, and I believe it had to do with cultural differences, that the universities had already begun to create programs where things were explicitly taught, but the little colleges like Grinnell, we don't really have that much of a formal program. You go and work with Dr. Schwartz for the summer, it'll be great. He's a chemist, he's a good guy, you'll come out fine. And so I think what might have changed, if I were to try to replicate, I suspect I would be losing the sheer number of colleges that do things implicitly. Because everybody got on the bandwagon of proposing grants that had specific program components. And I think that implicit stuff is kind of faded. That would be my guess. But overall, no difference depending on university, college, or master's university. Question?
Yeah, it's a quick question. You quoted the 61% of NSF RAUs were female. Is that an actual fact that's representative of the numbers, or is it females more likely to respond to
Good question, and I didn't check that against the actual, or even if we know, if NSF knows. In the general survey, women also outnumber men, and we don't know what the population would be. What is interesting about the survey is that although it's volunteer and we don't try to random sample, we do get year after year the following breakdowns. In the biological sciences, women outnumber men. In chemistry and in math, it's about dead even. And in physics and computer science, the men outnumber the women. And we get that year after year. And this is what I think are the benchmark statistics. I don't have them in hand, so I get the feeling that we are getting some representation.
I have experienced on this proportion of women and men, and I run an RU on biology. I was very pleased to find out our recruitment was actually 60% women and 40% men, really reflect the application pool. And it's a lot more girls are actively going out looking for the summer program than boys.
And is that in all the sciences, you think, or in biology?
I don't know. Biology, I see this year over year. That's reflective. The program recruits 60% women, really 60% women who apply.
Good.
I was wondering if there is any correlation between the quality of mentors and the results you get out of these surveys. Have you ever had any evaluation of the mentors' quality to see if that has any impact on the results you get?
No, we have no second measure of the mentor's quality. Only anecdotes in which a partner who was disappointed in the student's evaluation of mentors will say to me, yes, I know this is a problem, we're thinking about starting a program for mentoring, or perhaps, the students do say if their mentor is a graduate student or a postdoc, and while they don't rate them very low, sometimes there's a program to train those folks to be mentors as well. So no, I don't have the separate data. Excuse me, I do have a cough though. So what I'm going to do with my remaining time is I'm going to show you one other version of this that we have, which has to do with classroom activities in laboratories. It's called CURE, Classroom Undergraduate Research Experiences. There are a number of slides here, so I'm going to speed up the slides so the information will now be subliminal. You'll have to, you won't remember that you saw it, but later on you. When we were achieving some success with SURE, we got the question, I don't do an undergraduate research program in the summers, as you say. It's too expensive. But we've been trying to embed new discovery-based or inquiry-based work in our courses. So we're replacing our canned labs with some real projects that we think would result in real science. Is there a way to evaluate that? So we simply took the SURE and kind of modified it, and we created the CURE, which is actually a pre-test and a post-test. So imagine a course that you've invented that is now discovery-based biology or discovery-based chemistry, and you're thinking, how can I evaluate the outcome of this? We would ask the students to do a pre-test at the beginning of the term and a post-test at the end, and then we would look at the data. So very quickly, you can't see that one. There are questions that can't show up on slides. But the key to these is that they identify what kind of activities are going on, the lab or project that only instructor knows, a lab or project that no one knows. And so from this, we get information from the faculty member as well, and we loosely classify some courses as very research-like and other courses that are very traditional, not research-like. Some examples you may know of is the HHMI-funded C-Phages program, where freshmen are actually going out and finding, oh, thank you, going out and finding microphages that inhabit bacteria in the soil outside of the college, and they go in and isolate them, and then they do bioinformatics to identify them and sometimes even discover them. So that would be considered a research-like course. A traditional lecture course would not. So I'll go by those. But the point of the next few graphs is that you find that when faculty plan to do discovery-based learning in the course, they often get results that are very much like SURE summer research experiences. And so that's very gratifying. And if they don't, they tend to get more limited results. And so these graphs simply plot undergraduate summer research versus these high research-like courses, and we see the points are very close. So I won't dwell on that, and they're a little lower if the course is not research-like. And for specific programs, like the one that was run at the University of Illinois by Yi Lu in chemistry in real life, if you really have a focused program, you can get even more spectacular results. This is a graph that he published in Science magazine showing his programs actually students rating it superior to an undergraduate research experience.
But if you look at most of those, the green is consistently below the blue.
Yes, as it should be.
Why?
Because that's a mix of courses being below an authentic summer research. So that's not high, but Yi Lu's data were in the red triangle.
If you go back to the high,
So these two graphs, here's my animation today, okay, what are summarized together in those green.
but the high was still below the summer.
Yes, but closer, yeah. And there are all sorts of ways in which the high research-like courses seem to show superiority to the low research-like courses, and I won't dwell on that except to say that there are advantages to doing traditional courses. Your students will self-evaluate that their gains in listening to lectures are superior, reading a textbook, working on problem sets, taking tests in class, and computer modeling tend to come out a little higher for students in traditional classes than in the discovery-based. Within the CURE is a science attitude survey. And within that survey, which has about 25 items, there are some items that hang together very well when you do an exploratory factor analysis. And this is what I've come to call an engagement scale. And you see the questions of the engagement scale on the slide. Questions like, I get personal satisfaction when I solve a scientific problem by figuring out myself. We can have students take the science attitude scale in the pretest and again in the post-test. And we can look for not only their scores, but change. And so while this is a little bit too much detail perhaps, what we find is that if students increase their engagement with science by giving me high ratings on those positive questions, they tend to score a little higher in their courses than students who don't change or who have a negative change. And this happens across the levels of courses, intro courses, intermediate courses, and advanced courses. There's also in the same attitude survey some questions that are kind of negative about science. And we find generally if students score high on this, what I call the perception, short for negative perception, they don't quite do as well but the effect is not as strong as with the engagement. So the take-home message here, and I'm going to skip a few more slides, is that these items are embedded in the CURE survey and now in the Preflection survey. So we get some background about the student's attitude for science from these surveys. Let me jump ahead. We also have a series of questions which go to the topic of learning style. And this is based on the work of Kolb and others that say that generally speaking, we can talk about students having different styles of learning. This particular picture shows you 4 quadrants. On the upper right, the divergers who like specific concrete experiences and like to reflect on that tend to be humanities majors, according to literature. Next one down, the assimilators, we start to get into the sciences. But our scientists are mostly convergers. They like active experimentation and abstract concepts. And then the accommodators at some places would be business students. They like concrete examples but active work. And so this was a picture taken of an intro course where we see that the learning styles of the students are all over the place. But this is a picture from an advanced course, and we see that the people in the advanced course tend to congregate in the quadrants that are identified as scientists. And we're still looking into this kind of relationship. We know it doesn't make a big difference in their learning gains, what kind of learning style they might have told us they had, but we do know that if we have younger students and we ask them how likely is it for you to be a science major, people who are classified as convergers are far more likely to be confident that they will be science majors than other kinds of learning styles. So this kind of work is continuing. I haven't published any of it yet, but it's the kind of information we can gather from these surveys. Well, okay, let me wind that up and be quiet for a while and maybe have a discussion. Well, I would say the final take-home message to you is that all these are available, the SURE and the CURE, and there are several other surveys that we do. And what you really need to do is just send me an email if you'd like to get started with these. You don't need a grant. And you might want to collect information before you change your structure with a grant. So thank you very much for listening, and I guess we can go on and have our discussion.